Story 1. A fresh start. When I bought the bungalow at the corner of Oak Ridge and Willow Lane, I was clear on one thing. No HOA, no oversight, no bullshit. After years of apartment living and one unfortunate stint in a townhouse where the homeowners association fined me for having a hammock, I swore off any place that told me what color mailbox I could have. Willow Lane was perfect. The street was a weird little pocket of quirkiness in an otherwise beige suburb. There were ivy-covered porches, stained glass windows, one house painted deep lavender with golden trim. It wasn't total chaos, just character. That was what sold me that I moved in at the tail end of March, just as the early spring crocuses began popping their sleepy heads up in the lawn. The house itself needed some cosmetic work, chipped shutters, fading siding, a porch that creaked like it was auditioning for a haunted house tour. But the bones were good. My plan was to transform the place into a reflection of everything I loved. A warm terracotta base for the siding, soft aqua accents, trim in muted coral. I even had this whimsical idea of painting the porch steps with a gradual rainbow fade, subtle enough to blend from the sidewalk, but magical up close. My sister Sam called it boho fairycore. I called it mine. The first few weeks, things went fine. A couple of neighbors waved, some brought over muffins or cards. One even brought her golden retriever, Daisy, who flopped down on my porch like she'd been waiting for me to arrive. And then I met Arnold. Arnold lived across the street, diagonally. Two-story brick colonial with a white picket fence that had been painted within an inch of its life. His lawn looked like a golf course, and he wore polo shirts even when it rained. The first words he ever said to me were, "Planning to repaint that eyesore?" I blinked at Arnold, half expecting him to laugh. He didn't, sorry, I said, brushing some dust off my jeans. I'd been hauling in new porch chairs from the back of my truck. He tilted his head like he was inspecting a dent on a car. "Your house," he said, pointing with a gloved finger. "The color scheme. You're going to repaint it, right? Something more appropriate." I set the chair down a little too hard on the porch. "Actually, yeah, I am repainting it. But not because it's an eyesore. I've got something really beautiful planned." He squinted. "Hope it's neutral. The street's already gone too far with all this circus palette nonsense." I took a breath. "Well, I don't really do neutral," I said. "I like color. And the last time I checked, there's no HOA here telling us we can't." His mouth flattened into a line. "We've lived here for 18 years, he said, with this bizarre sense of entitlement. "And I've worked hard to maintain the look and feel of this neighborhood." "Oh," I tilted my head. "You're the mayor of Willow Lane?" His eyes narrowed. "Funny. Just don't make the whole place look like a daycare." And with that, he turned on his heel and marched back to his pristine lawn, where I could practically hear the grass clippings organizing themselves alphabetically. That I stood there for a moment, stunned, then let out a short laugh. Welcome to the neighborhood. That weekend, I started painting. I hired a local friend, Nina, an artist who moonlights as a muralist, and we worked together to prep the siding. As we primed and painted, neighbors slowed down to look. Most of them waved. A few gave us thumbs-ups. One older woman even yelled out, "Love that coral." Arnold, of course, was not a fan. He stood across the street with his arms crossed, watching like he was documenting a crime scene. On the second day, he shouted, "You know you're lowering property values, right?" Nina leaned down from the ladder and yelled back, "I dunno, this paint's not cheap. Maybe you should thank us." He stormed inside. Nina and I cackled the rest of the afternoon. About a week after finishing the paint job, I turned my attention to the front yard. The grass was patchy and dull, nothing like Arnold's over-manicured fairway, but I had no interest in turning it into a lawn war. I wanted something alive. So I dug out a small patch near the walkway and planted a sea of wildflower seeds. Poppies, black-eyed Susans, cosmos, and my favorite, towering sunflowers. I added a little handmade sign that said "Pollinators Welcome" in loopy script and stuck it in the dirt. Then came the fun part. A hand-painted garden gnome holding a watering can and 3 colorful garden flags I ordered online. One with a cat in sunglasses, another with a rainbow snail, and a third that simply said, "Let your weird bloom." It felt like mine. The kind of yard that made people smile. Naturally, Arnold hated it. The first time he commented, he did it while I was on my knees planting basil by the mailbox. "This used to be a respectable street," he muttered. "Not even." stopping to say it directly to my face. Now it looks like a toddler's birthday party. I didn't even flinch. Cool. Toddlers have excellent taste in whimsy. He just huffed and kept walking. A few days later, I came home to find one of my flags missing, ripped right off the pole. I replaced it. When it happened again, I installed a cheap camera aimed at the garden bed. I never got direct footage, but wouldn't you know it, the theft stopped after Arnold saw me installing it. Still, the passive aggression never let up. One day, he rolled his trash bin across the street and stood staring at my little free library box for a full 5 minutes. Another day, I caught him muttering while measuring his own yard with a tape measure, presumably to compare our property aesthetics. Whatever that meant, it wasn't just me noticing. Either at a neighborhood potluck hosted by an older couple 2 doors down, I overheard Mrs. Sanchez whisper to her husband, "Arnold's having one of his episodes again. He gets like this every time someone plants a tree." A few weeks later, my niece Hazel came to visit for the summer. She's 15, brilliant, artsy, and entirely unbothered by people like Arnold. She arrived with her sketchbook full of dragons and space whales, a suitcase of oversized hoodies, and a backpack full of acrylic paint. When she saw my garden and the house, her eyes lit up like I'd just taken her to Disneyland. "This is the kind of place that should have a name," she said that first night as we sipped lemonade on the porch. "Like Peach Haven or the Coral Cottage." I grinned. "I was thinking Whimsy House, but yours are better." Hazel had an idea. We bought a dozen blank cement pavers from the local garden center, laid them out on the porch, and spent 3 days painting them. Each one was its own little world: ladybugs, sunflowers, crescent moons, frogs wearing crowns. We sealed them and placed them like stepping stones along the front walk, leading from the sidewalk up to the porch like a gentle invitation to wonder. The morning after we finished, Arnold came stomping across the street like he'd just spotted graffiti on the Vatican. "What is this?" he barked, pointing at the turtle-shaped paver. "A turtle," I said cheerfully, sipping my coffee. "His name is Gerald. Hazel painted him." Hazel stood next to me, arms crossed. "He's wearing a bow tie," she added. "Because he's fancy." Arnold ignored her. "This whole front yard looks like a daycare craft project gone wrong. And now these? You're turning the street into a carnival." Hazel rolled her eyes. "Then go home and don't buy a ticket." I snorted. Arnold turned a shade redder. "You think this is funny?" he snapped. "You've been nothing but disrespectful since you got here." I stood up slowly, my mug still in hand. "Arnold, I have listened to you complain about every flower, every paint color, every handmade decoration. I have smiled. I have nodded. But I'm done. This is my house, my yard, my life. If you don't like it, don't look at it. It's time for you to grow up and get the hell over it." Hazel gasped, then giggled. Arnold sputtered. "Do you know who you're talking to?" I stared him down. "Yeah, a man who needs a hobby." He stormed off, muttering something about calling the city. Hazel doubled over laughing. For a few blissful days after the paver showdown, things were quiet. Arnold avoided eye contact whenever he was outside, and I genuinely began to hope maybe, just maybe, he'd moved on. Hazel and I spent our mornings planting herbs and her afternoons rearranging solar-powered fairy lights. We even hosted a mini garden tea party with my sister and her wife, complete with mismatched mugs and cucumber sandwiches. It was the kind of summer I always wanted my house to hold. Light, creative, welcoming. And of course, it couldn't last. It started with a knock at my door. I opened it to find Linda, who lived 2 doors down in a white house with pink shutters and a mailbox shaped like a barn. She was holding a Tupperware of lemon bars and a very specific kind of worried smile. "Hey, hon," she said, offering me the container. "I just wanted to, give you a little heads up." I took the bars and raised an eyebrow. "About?" She leaned in. "Arnold's been walking up and down the block for 2 days now, complaining to everyone who'll listen. Says you cursed at him in front of a child. That you're terrorizing the neighborhood with color." His words, not mine. I couldn't help it. I burst out laughing. Linda sighed. I know. But he's also talking about filing a community nuisance report. Said you're setting a bad example, lowering standards. Claims the pavers are tripping hazards." I blinked. "He's going to the city over painted rocks." Apparently. Hazel, who'd been listening from inside, yelled, "Tell him I'll write a letter of endorsement from Gerald the turtle." Linda snorted. "She's a riot." "Look, I'm not telling you to roll over, just letting you know." what he's up to. Honestly, most of us like what you've done with the place. It's fun. This street needs a little fun. I nodded, still trying to process the absurdity. Thanks, Linda. Seriously, lemon bars and Intel, solid combo. Before she left, she added, by the way, we're having a block party next Saturday. You should come. Bring your niece. Maybe bring Gerald, too. Hazel pumped her fist from the couch. We'll bring the whole Paver family. A few days later, I came home from the grocery store to find a bright yellow notice taped to my front door. First I panicked, thinking it was some kind of violation, but as I read it, my irritation turned into sheer disbelief. Notice of complaint, alleged violation, visual nuisance / property disturbance. It was signed by a junior clerk at City Code Enforcement and explained that a formal complaint had been filed citing excessive decorative installations, non-standard color choices, and, my personal favorite, obstructive artistic additions to walking paths. A clear dig at Hazel's painted pavers. Arnold had really done it. He filed a complaint over color and turtle rocks. Hazel stood beside me, reading over my shoulder. Did he actually write visual assault in his description? I pointed to the paragraph. Yep, right after flagrant disregard for the neighborhood aesthetic. Hazel snorted. Did you flag him down every morning and yell, "This is art," while painting sunflowers or something? Only in my heart, I muttered. The complaint didn't come with any fine or order to remove anything. It was more like a warning that an investigation might happen. Which meant someone from the city might show up to take pictures of my porch because one man couldn't cope with coral paint and whimsical lawn decor. I sighed, setting the paper on the counter. I guess I'll have to call and clarify everything. And maybe put on real pants. Hazel didn't miss a beat. Gerald doesn't negotiate with terrorists. We spent the next hour drafting a very polite, very detailed email to the city office, complete with high-resolution photos of the pavers, the garden, and my porch. I even included a copy of the building permit I'd pulled months ago for the paint job, just to make it crystal clear everything was legit. The next day, I got a response. Short and to the point. After reviewing your property, we see no evidence of any code violations. No further action required. Thank you for your cooperation. Hazel did a slow clap at the kitchen table. I walked out to the porch, held up the city's letter, and gave a cheerful wave in the direction of Arnold's house. He closed the blinds. Saturday arrived like a burst of sunshine and grill smoke. The block party was held at the Sanchez family's wide driveway and front lawn, with folding tables covered in checkered cloths, platters of deviled eggs, cold lemonade in mason jars, and a Bluetooth speaker blaring a mellow summer playlist. Kids ran around with bubbles and sidewalk chalk, while the adults mingled between camping chairs and crockpots. Hazel and I arrived with a tray of mini fruit tarts and 2 painted signs. One for our names, one that said, "Yes, Gerald the turtle is doing fine." She insisted that I was nervous at first, expecting some side eyes from Arnold's friends or whispers about the complaint. But honestly, nothing. People smiled. A few even complimented the house or asked about the paint colors. Linda, ever the hostess, grabbed my arm and led me straight to the sangria. "You showed up," she said, grinning. Bold move. "I'm not gonna hide," I said. Plus, Hazel said if I didn't let her wear her mushroom-patterned skirt to this, she'd riot. "She's a fashion icon," Linda declared. Also, that man's been pacing his porch all morning. Sure enough, Arnold hadn't left his lawn all day. He stood with his hands behind his back like a mall cop guarding invisible property lines. His face looked like he'd bitten into a lemon and found another lemon inside. About an hour into the party, it happened. Arnold crossed the street. Everyone quieted slightly, in that way groups do when something awkward walks in. He made a beeline for the table where Hazel and I were sitting, chatting with the neighbors about lavender tea and composting. He cleared his throat loudly. "I assume you received the complaint," he said, eyes locked on me like I was a school kid caught chewing gum. "I did," I said calmly. "And I assume you heard the city found 0 issues?" He scoffed. "That wasn't the point. It's about standards. Respect. Not turning the neighborhood into some art school dropout's fever dream." Hazel opened her mouth, but I held up a hand. "Arnold," I said slowly, "we live in a neighborhood without an HOA. That means you don't get to decide what standard looks like. And frankly, If your version of respect is tearing people down for painting rocks and planting flowers, then maybe you're the one who needs to reevaluate your role in this community. Someone near the lemonade stand murmured, "Oof." Arnold turned red. "This is my street. I've been here 20 years. And I've been here 5 months," I said. "And in 5 months, I've had more people over for tea and sunflowers than you have in 2 decades." A silence fell. Then Hazel raised her plastic cup of lemonade. "To Gerald." The crowd laughed. Arnold looked stunned, defeated even, and then, without another word, turned around and walked straight home. By Monday morning, Arnold had retaliated in the most dramatic way imaginable. He started a petition, printed on crisp white paper and clipped to a sad little clipboard. He took it door to door with the gusto of a man running for office, except his platform was less about hope and more about ban whimsical aesthetics at all costs. Linda texted me a photo of it, snapped from behind her curtain. "Petition to preserve the integrity of Willow Lane. Stop visual nuisances before they spread." I nearly choked on my coffee. According to the grapevine, and by grapevine, I mean Hazel's live commentary from the porch, he visited 8 houses in the first hour. Most people politely declined to sign. Some smiled and nodded just to get him off their doorstep. One guy, a retired tattoo artist with a koi pond, apparently asked Arnold if he was allergic to JOYBY late afternoon. He had a total of 6 signatures. One was from his wife, who rarely left their house and probably just wanted him to stop yelling. Hazel watched it all unfold like it was a Netflix series. He just got rejected by the twin brothers in the mint green house. They even gave him a cookie, though. Honestly, it's kind of wholesome. That evening, Hazel and I added a new addition to the garden, a hand-painted sign that said, "Welcome to the eyesore, population, us." We stuck it right next to Gerald the turtle. The next day, Arnold left a typed letter in my mailbox. No envelope. Just 3 paragraphs in 12-point Times New Roman font, detailing how I had upended the character of the block, how the city had chosen to ignore community concern, and how neighborly decency was being eroded by unchecked whimsy. He signed it, "With great disappointment, Arnold P. Weatherly, homeowner, taxpayer, steward of Willow Lane." Hazel read it aloud in a British accent while wearing a shawl she borrowed from my coat rack. Then we added a second lawn gnome, this one, holding a scroll and quill, to the garden, and named him Sir Reginald, keeper of the unchecked whimsy. That night, I noticed something. Across the street, the mint green twins had added rainbow pinwheels to their flower bed. Little by little, the block was changing, and Arnold? He was losing the ward. It was a Thursday when the reporter showed up that I was on the porch, sipping iced tea and touching up the ceiling on Hazel's painted pavers when a woman in slacks and sandals walked up the sidewalk, clipboard in hand, camera hanging from her neck. She had that familiar mix of curiosity and politeness, like someone who's about to ask you if they can write about your backyard flamingo in the local news. "Hi there," she said brightly. "I'm Dana with the Willow Springs Gazette. Do you live here?" "Sure do," I said, standing and wiping my hands on my shorts. "Let me guess, this is about the visual nuisance guy?" She laughed. "It is. We got a letter, hand-delivered, from someone named Arnold Weatherly." Of course you did," I said, stepping aside to gesture toward the porch. "Welcome to the infamous eyesore." Dana's eyes lit up as she took in the colors. Coral porch trim, aqua shutters, the wildflowers dancing in the breeze. "Honestly," she said, lifting her camera, "this is charming. I don't know what he's on about." We sat down at the table under my hanging lanterns, Hazel nearby with a sketch pad, pretending not to eavesdrop, but obviously listening to every word. Dana asked questions about the house, the garden, the community. I explained how I'd intentionally chosen this neighborhood because it wasn't bound by HOA rules, because it had soul and personality, and because I believed homes should reflect their people, not just resale value. She nodded, taking notes. "So, what's your response to the accusation that your decor has disrupted the visual harmony of the street?" I grinned. "Harmony doesn't mean monotony. This neighborhood was already full of color and character before I showed up. If one person wants every house to look like a corporate brochure, maybe the problem isn't the street, it's his expectations." Hazel muttered, "Boom. Roasted." Dana took a photo of Gerald the turtle, and asked if she could take a portrait of Hazel and me in front of the house. Hazel insisted we pose with Sir Reginald the lawn gnome. I agreed. The next morning, the Gazette's headline read, "Colorful Home Sparks Neighborhood Debate, Whimsy or Nuisance?" The photo beneath it showed Hazel and me smiling in front of our house, surrounded by wildflowers, painted pavers, and just enough color to piss off Arnold for the rest of the year. A week after the article ran, Arnold went quiet, and no more early morning pacing. No more sarcastic comments about turtles or lawn gnomes. He even stopped mowing his grass twice a week, which was how I knew something had shifted. Maybe it was the Gazette piece. Neighbors kept waving or stopping by to compliment the story. And one kid even dropped off a hand-drawn picture of Gerald for the library box. Maybe Arnold realized that no amount of clipboard diplomacy would change the tide, or maybe he just ran out of steam. The rest of us didn't slow down. Linda added a wind chime made of sea glass to her porch. The mint green twins painted their shutters lavender. Even the Sanchez family, who'd always kept things neat but neutral, started growing sunflowers in their window boxes. Hazel called it the neighborhood whimsy rebellion. I like that. Before Hazel left for home, we hosted one more backyard tea party, this time with twinkle lights and little cakes and a tiny chalkboard that said, "Goodbye to our artist in residence." Gerald got a hat. Sir Reginald got a mustache. Arnold, surprisingly, didn't show up to complain. Instead, the next morning, I found something on my front porch, a small stone that hand-painted a blue jay perched on a sunflower in a note. Just the rock, resting beside Gerald, like it had always belonged. I never asked Arnold if it was from him, and he never said anything. But a few days later, I saw him trimming his hedges, and when our eyes met, he gave me the smallest of nods that I nodded back to Hazel's. Pavers are still the first thing people comment on when they visit. The house still glows coral at sunset. The flowers bloom, the lights twinkle, and Gerald stands firm at the gate like a tiny, cheerful bouncer. And Arnold? Well, he still wears polos and edges his lawn with military precision. But he started sitting on his porch a little more often, sipping coffee, and saying less. Maybe that's all either of us really needed. A little space, a little color, and the choice to let it be. Story 2. Bright Beginnings, Bitter Glances. When I moved into Maple Hollow, I thought I'd found the perfect spot. Quiet street, tree-lined sidewalks, just enough quirky charm to avoid the soulless sameness of cookie-cutter suburbs. There was a teal house with a yellow door across the road, a brick cottage covered in ivy at the corner, and best of all, no HOA. I double-checked that 3 times. My name's Drew. I'm a graphic designer who works from home, and I'd been saving for years to buy a place that felt like an extension of my brain. Creative, warm, full of color. So when I found this modest little 1960s ranch tucked beneath a canopy of red maples, I knew it was the one. That the house itself was plain when I bought it. Faded beige siding, drab brown shutters, and a cracked concrete path leading to a splintered porch. But I didn't mind. It was a blank canvas, and my first few weeks in the neighborhood were uneventful. People waved. Some stopped to say hi. I met a retired couple who offered me lemon cookies and a teenager next door named Marcy who asked if I had any cool old video games. I did. And then there was Curtis. Curtis lived 3 houses down in a 2-story colonial with navy blue shutters and a lawn trimmed within millimeters of its life. He didn't wave. He didn't introduce himself. He just stared. The first time we spoke was the day a painter came to give me an estimate. I saw Curtis standing at the edge of his driveway, hands on his hips, eyes locked on my porch like it had personally offended him. I offered a polite wave. He offered a scowl, whatever. Not everyone's a people person. That changed the moment I painted the house. I went with seafoam green for the main siding. Bright, clean, fresh. For the trim, I chose a soft butter yellow that practically glowed at golden hour. The front door? Coral red. It was bold, yeah, but cheerful. The kind of place you'd imagine in a storybook. The painters arrived on a Thursday, and by Friday afternoon, the transformation was well underway. I watched from my driveway, grinning like a kid seeing his art project come to life. That's when I heard the first complaint. "Excuse me." Curtis's voice cracked through the warm spring air like a whip. I turned to find him standing on the sidewalk, arms crossed like he was preparing to evict me personally. I wiped my hands on my jeans. "Hey, can I help you?" Actually pointed, at my house. What is that color supposed to be? It's called seafoam, I said. Cool, right? He blinked at me like I'd said vomit green. It's not cool. It's garish. You're ruining the look of the whole street. I frowned. There's no HOA, man. Everyone does their own thing around here. He shook his head. Sure, there's no formal HOA, but we have a culture, a tone, a visual agreement. And that, he waved vaguely at the coral front door, that is completely inappropriate. I didn't realize my home was part of your Pinterest board, I said, trying to keep my voice level. This neighborhood has been tasteful and consistent for decades. I looked around at the purple flower boxes across the street, the quirky mosaic walkway 2 doors down, the lemon yellow door at the corner, right. Super consistent. He narrowed his eyes. Don't be sarcastic. I smiled. Don't be dramatic. With that, I turned and walked back up my driveway, ignoring the muttered curses behind me. The painters finished the job 2 days later, and the final result? Stunning. The colors popped against the red maple trees. I added a couple of white rocking chairs to the porch and a little handmade "Hello, sign Marcy helped me paint." And Curtis? Curtis doubled down. By the following weekend, Curtis had declared war, not outright. No official declaration or flaming torches. Just the subtle, suburban kind of war where someone mows their lawn angrily at 6 a.m., then glares at you for existing. He started with passive-aggressive remarks, shouted just loud enough for me to hear as I worked in the yard. Some of us still care about property values. Or, looks like a Crayola box exploded over there. I didn't bite. Honestly, I was too busy laying out the pathway stones I'd been collecting from flea markets and garden shops for months. Each one a little different. Some painted, some just beautifully worn by time. I embedded them into the front yard, winding a curved trail through the grass like a colorful river leading to my steps. Curtis stood in his driveway that afternoon, hose in hand, watching with all the joy of someone witnessing their childhood treehouse being demolished. "You're turning the street into an amusement park," he called out. "Great." I shouted back. People love amusement parks. Marcy, who was helping me place the last stone, burst out laughing. "Curtis hates fun," she whispered like it was a known local legend. Later that week, I installed 2 solar-powered lanterns at the edge of the path. Simple, warm light. Not a disco show. But Curtis still took it upon himself to knock on my door. I opened it with a smile already loaded on my face. "You put in lights now?" he demanded. "What's next? A popcorn machine? A Ferris wheel?" "I mean, a popcorn machine does sound cool," I replied. "But no, just a couple of lights. For visibility and vibes. You're making a spectacle of yourself." I shrugged. "I'm not trying to impress anyone. You don't belong here." That one stung more than I expected. It wasn't about paint or lights anymore. It was about territory, gatekeeping, power. I took a breath and looked him straight in the eye. "That's the thing, Curtis. I do belong here, just like everyone else." He scoffed, muttered something about standards, and stomped off down the sidewalk. But the next morning, I found one of my lanterns tipped over and cracked. At first, I wanted to believe it was an accident. A raccoon, a gust of wind, a kid with a stray soccer ball. But the crack in the glass was too deliberate. The lantern had been yanked clean out of the soil and left face down, like someone wanted me to know it wasn't welcome. I picked it up, sighed, and set it on the porch table. Marcy showed up 10 minutes later with a bag of donuts and noticed the damage immediately. "Okay, that was definitely Curtis," she said, mouth half full of chocolate glaze. "Dude was glaring at it yesterday like it insulted his khakis." I didn't want to make assumptions, but yeah, I had the same thought. I checked my doorbell camera, hoping maybe it caught something. Nothing. Still, the vibe on the street had shifted. Curtis no longer settled for glares and muttered insults. He'd taken to stopping passing neighbors to talk, always when I was in earshot. He's been here 6 weeks and already thinks he's the mayor of Whimsyville. I heard him say one afternoon as I watered the rose bushes I'd just planted. Another time, I'd be embarrassed to let guests park near that mess. Marcy called it his campaign trail, since he kept repeating the same angry talking points like he was running for HOA president of a neighborhood without an HOA. I tried to let it go, focused on finishing the yard, installing a recycled wood trellis, and training jasmine vines to climb it. I even added a bird bath shaped like a lily pad, simple, elegant, and apparently too much for Curtis's blood pressure. because the next time we crossed paths, me walking back from the mailbox, him taking out his garbage, he paused, looked me up and down, and said flatly, "You know, some of us bought into this neighborhood for peace and order, not a damn cartoon." That was the moment I snapped. I dropped my mail into the crook of my arm, turned to him, and said, "Curtis, I'm not decorating your house. I'm decorating mine. If seeing a few flowers and colors gives you this much emotional trauma, maybe try therapy, or blinders, or both." He went red, then purple. "You're being intentionally provocative," he growled. "And you're being intentionally boring," I snapped. "Get over it." And I walked away before he could say another word. After our front yard verbal joust, Curtis went full villain origin story. Within days, printed flyers started appearing in mailboxes. Yes, actual printed flyers, bearing the title, "Preserve the Character of Maple Hollow. Say no to visual nuisance." There was a grainy photo of my house, from across the street, no less, with red arrows pointing to the trellis, the pavers, and even the bird bath like they were crime scene evidence. Beneath it, in bold lettering, "What starts with seafoam, paint ends with chaos." I nearly spit out my coffee reading it. Marcy brought her copy over like it was contraband. "You put one in my mailbox," she said, "after I helped you paint the hello sign." The audacity. Curtis's petition was taped to the community bulletin board at the park entrance the next day. I watched as 3 different people read it, shrugged, and went back to playing with their dogs. Still, it was clear Curtis wasn't letting this go. At night, I caught glimpses of him on his porch, scribbling into a notebook like he was planning tactical operations. I imagined him Googling terms like, "Can you arrest someone for having too many flowers?" and legal action against coral doors. He even confronted Mrs. Landry, the sweet elderly woman on the corner, when she put up a hanging basket of bright orange petunias. "You're encouraging the problem," he said. She blinked at him, clutching her watering can like a weapon. "Curtis, they're flowers. You need to go inside and watch something soft." Things came to a head the next Saturday. A city maintenance worker showed up while I was trimming the jasmine, clipboard in hand. Neutral expression. "Afternoon," he said. "I'm here about a reported hazardous garden installation." I sighed. "Curtis." He didn't answer, just glanced around, scribbled something down, then asked me to explain the layout of my yard. I walked him through everything. No obstructions on the sidewalk. No improper fixtures. Just plants, stepping stones, and solar lights. That he nodded. "Everything looks fine here. Sorry to bother you." Before he left, he glanced back at my porch and said, "For what it's worth, I think it looks great." Curtis watched the whole interaction from behind his curtain. Later that night, I found another stone from my path tipped sideways, but I didn't bother reacting. Instead, I reinforced it, added a dab of superglue at the base, and went back. Inside, Marcy texted me an hour later. "Curtis is standing on his lawn, just staring at your trellis again. Do we offer him snacks or a therapist?" A few days after the city worker gave my yard a clean bill of health, I got a surprise invitation. It came in the form of a handwritten note, slipped under my doormat, and smelling faintly of lavender. "Dear Drew, a few of us from the Maple Hollow Garden Circle would love to invite you to our next meetup. We've been admiring your creative landscaping and think you'd bring a fun energy to the group. Warmly, Lila Whitaker and friends." I blinked at the note, then turned it over. Yep, real handwriting. Not printed, not cursed, just kind-eyed. Heard of the Garden Circle in passing. A small group of mostly older neighbors who met every couple of weeks to swap plants, tea, and gossip. They weren't a governing body, just enthusiasts. I showed the note to Marcy, who was eating cereal at my kitchen island. "You've officially been accepted into the inner circle of neighborhood mischief," she said. "Next stop, Gnome Exchange program." The meetup was at Lila's house, a cozy cottage wrapped in ivy with an actual wishing well in the front yard. I brought a pot of fresh basil and a nervous smile. Inside, I was met with the warm aroma of chamomile tea and cookies, and a group of women who looked like they stepped out of a cozy mystery novel. There was Ruth, who wore wide-brimmed hats and swore like a sailor, Janine, who ran a succulent trade via Facebook, and Betty, who had a ribbon-wrapped binder labeled Bee-Friendly Planting Matrix. Lila poured me tea. "We just wanted to tell you in person, we love what you've done. Really, your house feels alive." I smiled, genuinely touched. "Thank you. Not everyone agrees." Ruth snorted. Oh, Curtis, please. That man once filed a noise complaint because someone had wind chimes tuned in a minor key. Betty leaned in. He came to our last meeting, tried to get us to draft some kind of aesthetic accord. He called your coral door an attack on the senses, Janine added, which, honestly, made us like it more. We laughed, and something inside me unclenched. For the first time since moving in, I felt like I wasn't just defending my space. I was sharing it with people who understood that by the time I left, I had 3 plant cuttings, 2 invitations to garden swap Saturdays, and 1 tiny, hand-painted ceramic mushroom for my flower bed. Curtis may have declared war, but I was building alliances. Inspired by the warm welcome from the garden circle, I decided to do something neighborly. Despite everything, Curtis's crusade, the broken lantern, the sideways stone, I figured a peace offering couldn't hurt. Or at least, it would make me feel better to TRY.SO. I made 2 loaves of banana bread, with chocolate chips, obviously, wrapped one in parchment paper, and scribbled a note. Hi Curtis, thought I'd share something sweet. I know we got off on the wrong foot, but I'm hoping we can find some common ground. Drew. I walked down the sidewalk and stood on his porch for a solid 30 seconds, wondering if I should just pretend I never had this idea. Then I sighed, placed the loaf by his door, tucked the note under the ribbon, and headed back home. Marcy was watching from her porch, sipping iced tea. Bold move, she called out. Could backfire. I replied, yeah, but banana bread's hard to hate. The next morning, the banana bread was gone. No note. No knock. No text. Just gone. I decided to take it as neutral territory. Not forgiveness. Not a truce. But not another lantern smashing, either. For a few days, things were quiet. Curtis didn't say a word, but he also didn't shoot daggers with his eyes every time I walked to the mailbox. He started spending more time in his backyard than his front porch, and I let myself believe maybe, the storm had passed. Then came the neighborhood newsletter. Each month, the Maple Hollow Gazette, different from the city paper, got delivered by hand to every doorstep. It was small, 2 pages, front and back, mostly about recycling dates, upcoming events, and who lost their cat last week. But this edition had something new. Right on page 2, Spotlight Dispute, the colorful controversy. On Maple Hollow. It wasn't signed, but everyone knew who'd written it. The language was classic Curtis. Words like visual degradation, neighborhood identity erosion, and, hilariously, decorative overreach. He claimed multiple concerned residents were suffering visual fatigue due to a sudden surge in aggressive artistic choices. Visual fatigue. Marcy sent me a photo of the article with the caption, Curtis is 1 lawn flamingo away from a nervous collapse. I laughed, but yeah, it stung. I tried. I'd baked a peace loaf, for God's sake. And he responded with a passive-aggressive manifesto printed next to an ad for dog grooming SO that night. I lit all the solar lanterns, turned on the fairy lights in the jasmine trellis, and sat on my porch with a mug of tea, staring into the glowed out. If he wanted to play this game in the shadows, find out I'd just keep shining brighter. The next weekend, Marcy showed up at my door holding a paint-splattered shoebox and wearing a grin that could only mean trouble. I made something, she said. Should I be concerned? Yes, she said, but in a good way. She opened the box to reveal a birdhouse, but not just any birdhouse. This one had a rainbow roof, glitter around the entry hole, and little painted vines crawling up the sides. On the front, in bold black letters, it said, "No gloom allowed." It's perfect, I said, laughing. Geraldine the cardinal is going to love this. We hung it from the branch of the maple tree closest to the sidewalk. Marcy tied a bright orange ribbon around the branch for extra flair. You know this is going to push Curtis over the edge, right? I said. She pulled a lollipop from her pocket and shrugged. He wrote a newsletter article about visual fatigue, Drew. At this point, I think he's got a Pinterest board titled Things I Hate That Spark Joy. The birdhouse was an instant hit. 3 neighbors stopped to ask where they could get one. A woman named Priya, who lived in the stucco house 2 doors down, brought over a tray of iced cookies shaped like paintbrushes and said, I've been waiting for someone to shake this place up for years. Curtis, of course, did not approve. That afternoon, I caught him standing across the street, arms folded, staring up at the birdhouse like it had insulted his ancestors. I waved. He scowled. I'd be lying if I said I didn't enjoy it just a little. The next morning, the birdhouse had a tiny note wedged inside. Absolutely adorable. More, please. Anonymous, Hazel would have called it gorilla joy. Marcy called. It pumped positivity. I just called it fuel. I started noticing little signs that the neighborhood was shifting, slowly, subtly, in my direction. Someone added chalk art along their driveway. Another house put out painted flower pots with smiling faces. Ruth from the garden circle replaced her faded mailbox with one shaped like a mushroom. Curtis didn't say anything directly, but I caught him once staring at my house, jaw tight, hands behind his back, like a museum curator standing in front of a painting he hated but couldn't stop thinking about. For the first time, I wondered if maybe, deep down, he didn't just hate the color. Maybe he hated that it wasn't his. The tension had been simmering for weeks. You could feel it in the way Curtis trimmed his hedges, aggressively, like he was trying to take it out on the shrubbery. Or how he'd pretend not to hear people when they said good morning, if they were within 10 feet of my property line. Then came the final straw. It wasn't the new string of solar fairy lights I installed along the path. It wasn't the lavender wreath Marcy and I hung on the mailbox. It wasn't even the fact that Geraldine the cardinal had moved into the rainbow birdhouse and started chirping at dawn like a tiny, glitter-dusted alarm clock. No, it was the mural that a friend of mine from college, Josh, was visiting for the weekend. He's a muralist now, works with schools and cafes and libraries painting huge, vibrant outdoor scenes. We were catching up over drinks when he said, "You know what your porch needs? A splash of magic. I've got leftover paint. You in?" I didn't hesitate. We spent Saturday sketching, and by Sunday, the side of my porch steps had been transformed into a whimsical vine pattern with curling tendrils, little flowers, and a few hidden ladybugs and bees. It was playful, subtle enough not to dominate the house, but bright enough to make you smile. Curtis did not smile. He stormed across the street just after dinner, stomping up my walkway like a man on a mission to deliver the 10 Commandments. I was sitting on the porch with Josh, a beer in hand, laughing about something stupid from college. Curtis didn't bother with pleasantries. "This," he snapped, jabbing a finger toward the mural, "this is vandalism. On your own house." Josh blinked. "That's kind of the opposite of what vandalism means, man." Curtis ignored him. "You've crossed a line. I tolerated the lights. I tolerated the ridiculous birdhouse. But this is a declaration of war on the entire aesthetic integrity of Maple Hollow." I set down my drink. "Curtis, it's paint. On my steps. No one else's. You've turned this block into a kindergarten art show." Josh leaned forward, voice calm. "You know, most people like art." Curtis turned red. "This isn't art. It's chaos, and I won't stand for it." I stood up. "Then sit down, Curtis. Seriously, go home. Breathe into a bag. Maybe take up knitting." He sputtered. "Do you even care about the community?" "I am part of the community," I said. "I've met more neighbors in the last 3 months than you probably have in 3 years. I bake banana bread. I help people plant things. I smile when people walk by. What exactly have you done lately besides complain and throw tantrums?" Curtis stood frozen for a second. Then, muttering to himself, he turned and stormed off down the sidewalk, his shoes crunching on my paver path like gravel beneath the weight of his fury. Josh leaned back and let out a low whistle. I think I just saw a man unravel in real time. A week passed after Curtis's meltdown, and the neighborhood felt lighter. People lingered longer on walks. Marcy hosted a sidewalk chalk art contest for the local kids. Ruth dropped off fresh rosemary wrapped in newspaper. Even Geraldine, the cardinal, seemed to be chirping with extra gusto, her little rainbow birdhouse now surrounded by a semicircle of painted stones gifted by neighborhood children. Curtis, meanwhile, vanished, not entirely. His house still stood, hedges trimmed, porch spotless, but he wasn't pacing, wasn't glaring, wasn't hosing down his walkway while muttering about aesthetic corruption. He just disappeared behind his blinds. I figured maybe he'd given up. Then, one afternoon, I opened my mailbox and saw a plain white envelope addressed in stiff, careful handwriting. To Drew from Curtis J. Templeton. I stood on the sidewalk for a second, just staring at it. I half expected glitter to explode when I opened it, or for it to be full of legal threats written in cursive, but inside was a single sheet of paper, typed. Drew, I read the article in the city paper, and the Maple Hollow newsletter response piece, and the Garden Circle's note that I didn't realize people liked what you've done, that I thought I was protecting the neighborhood from something tacky. I see now that I was just angry it didn't look like the version I had in my head. I suppose I liked being the one people deferred to. You disrupted that, that's not your fault. You were right. I should find something else to do. For what it's worth, I still think the door is too bright. But the mural is nice. Sincerely, Curtis J. Templeton. I stood there, blinking, rereading it, half expecting to find sarcasm hidden between the lines, some final jab I'd missed. But no.it was an apology, a stiff, reluctant, probably painful apology, but real. That night, I placed the letter in a folder labeled stuff I never thought would happen, then lit the porch lanterns and sat out front with a beer. The neighborhood glowed. Wind chimes tinkled. Someone across the street was playing acoustic guitar. The fairy lights in the jasmine trellis cast soft shadows on the sidewalk. And then Curtis's porch light came on. He stepped out. No clipboard, no scowl, and just stood there, watching the dusk roll in. After a moment, he nodded once in my direction. I raised my bottle and nodded back. No fanfare. No handshake. But maybe, finally, a truce.